Hello to you, my lovely listener. It's me, Jason Paul, and the first thing I want to say about this episode today is I deeply apologise to the guest because I actually recorded this 2 years ago before I lost the recording, and then I went on the closet spiritual break that I've told you about several times, and then I thought the episode had disappeared forever. However, I've managed to rescue it, so it is a really interesting one, and the first thing I'll say is this is the Jason of 2 years ago and where he was at with his mediumship at that time. And I must say, listening back to it actually did give me quite a giggle. So first things first, the guest today is called Sarah Jeffries. She's a psychic medium and she's the founder of At One Events and also the president of the Canberra Spiritualist Association in Australia. She's a former army officer, which is a very unexpected contrast as the episode goes on. And she's been on a 27-year mediumship journey. And at the time of the recording, she'd only gone professional, I say professional, she'd only gone full-time, which was a big leap of faith, actually. And we sort of talk about that. And I really find that interesting as well, because I know mediumship is my calling, even though at times I think, I don't know if I want to do it full-time one day, but I know that's kind of what I need to do, not what I necessarily want to do. I have to do it. My soul demands I do it. But we talk on this episode about fear, sort of Sarah's fears as a child, about the spirit world and how she had a really life-changing reading one day, and it literally changed everything for her. So it is a really interesting conversation, and I found it so interesting when I actually listened back to it, listening to myself where I was then. So you're going to enjoy this one. I hope you do anyway. Here's to you, my darlings. This is my conversation with Sarah Jeffries. Sarah, welcome to the Soul Sick podcast.
Jason, thank you so much for having me. I'm delighted to be with you.
So I'm very excited to go into your background. I guess to begin with, tell us a bit about you and some of your experiences that have shaped the person that you are today. Because going from the army to be a medium, that's very different, to say the least.
It is, and most people can't see the correlation between both groups. And quite often, those two groups seem almost pitted against each other, which I think is a little odd. But if I step back in time with you, Jason, I can look back and go, actually, my start point, what was pivotal, was actually fear-based. Because I can look back as a kid, I was brought up in a wonderful home, wonderful family, positive religious background in the sense of, a belief in God, raised in the sort of Anglican church. But I had some real concerns. Because I was an army family, we got to move around, Jason, and I got to live in London when I was 11. And in my class of all girls were girls from all over the world. And you can imagine the poor religious studies teacher who had every religion represented in that class. And my very best friend was a Pakistani, and her prophet was Muhammad. And I was so worried for her because my grandmother had told me over the years that the only way to God was through Jesus. And I just couldn't understand how my friends were going to be destined to hell. And it really disturbed me. And I really struggled. A couple of years later, I'm back in Australia. I'm confirmed into the Anglican Church. And I put it to the priest. I said, if I don't believe in God, will I go to hell? Now, he didn't quite say yes, but he didn't say no. So I had fear-based faith. I was scared that if I didn't believe in God, I could end up in hell. And so that was really pivotal for me of being on the search for the answer. What was the reality? Where was God? What was going to happen when we die? So another couple of years jump forward and I find myself in Perth. And I'm talking, this is back in the 1990s, right? So no Google, no internet, no nothing else. And I put onto this lady who does readings. And so I book a reading, and it happens to be Christine Morgan. And all she knows is my name is Sarah. And I went to this house, and she wasn't in tie-dye, and she didn't have crystals hanging, and she didn't have a crystal ball, and she just looked like a very normal, nice lady in the suburbs. And I went into the room with her, and I had about 45 minutes or an hour, and I took 17 pages of notes. 17 pages.
Wow.
And she told me all sorts of things about my family. She taught me all sorts of things about myself. And she said some things about some names of people. And this, I was actually heavily pregnant with my first child at this time. She said, now we'll talk about Anne and Jim. I think nothing wrong with the names Anne and Jim, but I'm not naming my children Anne and Jim. Who are these people? Anyhow, go back to my parents, tell them the story. Christine's brought through loved ones that I know exist. But then I said, to mention this Anne and Jim. And my mother's eyes like saucers. That's your great aunt and uncle or something like that. And I was hooked, Jason, because I just went, you know what? This lady couldn't have read this telepathically off my mind. She couldn't go through my bins. She couldn't research me. She knew all of this information. The spirit world suddenly became alive for me. And in that moment, honestly, I can understand why people of great faith go knocking on people's doors, because if I could have knocked on every door and said to everybody, I have the answer, the spirit world is alive, there really is eternal life, I would have done it. But I learned that you can't do that because people just go, well, she's a little bit loopy. And people have to find their own way through their own experience. Mm. So really it was fear, and it was a confusion about this. If we have this loving God, how is it that billions of people aren't going to make it to heaven?
What? So it sounded like that was an absolutely life-changing moment that you had there. And it sounded that I kind of get where you're coming from with the fear, because I think that a lot of my own journey was driven by fear, and mine was the fear of death and not really understanding, what the hell am I doing on this planet? What is the actual point of all of this? So you suddenly find from that moment onwards, then you're absolutely knowing that there's more to perhaps life and death. What did that do to your relationship with your religion at that point? How did was that still a part of your life? Was that still something that you believed in?
Look, I think I can say very strongly I am a spiritualist, but I think all the religions of the world have themes that run through them that we can recognize and accept as truths. Of course, they're all influenced by man. They're all influenced by interpretation. But I don't, I still believe in God. I still believe in the existence of Jesus, but I believe in all sorts of pathways to God. Mine just happened to be this one.
So you became a spiritualist over time. How was your understanding of spirituality evolved over the years? What does it mean to you now?
Well, that's a really good question, because there's a difference, of course, between spirituality, spiritualist, medium, and I think we can have these sort of false idols. I think we can feel that everyone who has a mediumistic ability must therefore be spiritual. I don't think that's the case. I think you can have a faculty but not be any step closer to enlightenment than the next person. And certainly I've met many people who I would say were highly spiritual, because of how they walk in the world, how they treat people, how they serve others. And they might not have a religious belief at all. And I'd still go, well, there's a spiritual person. For me, I think like everybody, you develop over time as to what you think is spiritual. I think we're all doing our very best. I think we learn with time that we can do better. Sometimes we don't realize that at the time, but with hindsight.
Yes.
I think spirituality is actually, I think it's a journey. I think it's a path of just trying to do a little better every day.
So I do agree with you. So walk us through then. So you have this reading with Christine, and then that sort of acts as the catalyst on your journey of development. Walk us through, how you have developed over the years and what's worked for you, and what your journey kind of looked like, and some highlights along the way. Very hard. These conversations are not easy because some of the questions I ask, they're very big, high level questions.
Jason, I really laugh when I look at my path, because after I had this reading with Christine and, I was hooked, I then basically became a stalker, let's be honest, because I just wanted to go on every workshop she was running. And remember, this is, here's this, 24-year-old who's about to have a first baby. So I've got other commitments. So I would get to whatever workshop I could get, if I could get babysitting. And then it took me about 2 years before I could get into Christine's home circle. So she finally invited me to join her home circle. And I would turn up on a Friday morning. I put my kids in childcare for a couple of hours on a Friday morning. And I'd go out to her home. And there was this beautiful group of women and a gentleman. And most of them were far more experienced than I was. And many people know this, and now I'll tell the world, Jason, but I used to turn up at the front door, and even before I'd knocked on the front door, I was already crying, because I was just so emotional about finding this place and this space and this connection. I was also a young mum and, married to an SAS chap who was constantly deployed to war zones. So, I'd turn up and I'd sort of just be delighted to be there with these wonderful, experienced ladies. Oh, I've skipped a really important part of this, because my first experience with the spirit world was actually at one of these workshops. And I can look back and go, oh, Sarah, how you presented that was terrible, but the experience was huge. So I was with Christine, and again, I'm surrounded by these ladies who are all probably 10, 20 years older than me, all with more experience. We'd done the workshop, and at the end of the day, Christine said, all right, I want you all to get a link with spirit. And we're just sitting in this circle. Just get a link and just share. So I'm sitting there. I've never done this before. And I see in my mind's eye a young man, brown spiky hair, and I get this real constriction around my neck. And I'm terrified, and I see a coffin.
Oh, wow.
And I'm thinking, I don't know if this person is strangled or whether they're hung, but I'm so distressed because I don't know this group of people. I don't know if what I'm feeling belongs to one of them. I don't know how I'm going to present this. So, of course, tears pouring down my face. Panicked. How am I going to deliver this? And Christine sort of eked it out of me, and I explained what I had experienced. Well, the contact was actually for Christine. Christine had been helping the police find this young man, and he had visited her, and he helped direct her basically geographically to where his body was in the bush. that day was his funeral.
Wow.
So here I am, the brand new baby of the group, giving a link to the teacher, crying my eyes out, not knowing how to present it. And it stuck with me forever. I'll never forget his name. I'll never forget the experience. And that's why I could say it wasn't happy, joy. It wasn't experience of, this is, 99-year-old grandfather. This was really sad and distressing, and the circumstances were awful. But the spirit world certainly got my attention. Right. So that's then I got into circle with Christine. Army life means you're posted. So I had 2 years in circle, and we were posted away. And I was devastated. I was really distraught. So how am I, who have I got? I'm leaving these great people that I've been seeing weekly for 2 years. And got to Canberra, other side of Australia, went looking, found nothing.
Isn't that crazy? The capital of Australia. I've had this conversation a few times about obviously the UK and us being somewhat spoilt here, but I just struggle to compute the fact that you can look out there in a central city and not find anything.
That's right. And, like many home circles, some are just unseen. If you don't know the people, you don't know. So anyhow, Christine eventually came to the eastern states, and I'd get Christine to come to Canberra. And, I'd host her and we'd run some workshops, and then she'd go back home, and then the students would be like, well, that was great, but what now? And eventually Christine said, well, Sarah, you know a little bit more than the rest of them, so you need to take it from here and facilitate groups. And she'd give me some guidance over the phone, etc. And so began my catapult into facilitating / teaching. And I look back, Jason, and I just think, okay, this was my path, but I wouldn't recommend it to anyone. I wouldn't say jump into teaching. I can look back and go, tell you what, was the blind leading the blind at times. And I've eaten so much humble pie, over the last quarter century, where I've had to go, well, 10 years ago I said this, that, and the other. Well, now I have a different understanding. So I know I made you all do this exercise and that exercise, but actually I have a new understanding now. And having to, I've had beautiful people stick with me because I made the promise that if I learned something different, I would share it. I
think that's so, I think that's it's such a nice story how you kind of find yourself in this situation by virtue of there not being anything else or anyone else. And then it almost feels like you were sort of forced into it. You did not have a choice in order to do this.
In a way.
With the benefit of hindsight now and kind of looking back, how has all of that kind of shaped the person that you are today?
I think I was very lucky because Christine really taught about discernment, and she introduced her students to people like Simon James and Bright Robinson and various others, and she'd hold retreats in Western Australia, etc. So where it really influenced me in those early days was the focus on discernment. What's real? Can teachers do what they teach? Is there an understanding? Can you look at them and go, yeah, they know what they're talking about? It also really influenced, I think this is where it sort of led me to today, is I have a real thing about ethics, and I have a real thing about evidence, and I have a real thing about if you're going to say you're representing the spirit world, you better be doing a good job of it, because not only are you answerable to the person in front of you and doing no harm to them, but you're answerable to the spirit world, and I just think, I don't ever want to get to the spirit world, Jason, and anyone say, so Sarah, we need to talk. You said this on my behalf, but, or you implied I said this. I know there are other teachers who will disagree with me on this, but I think, no, I think it would be fair. I can imagine myself in the spirit world. I can imagine trying to get to my children. And I can imagine being a little bit annoyed if a medium said I said something to my kids that I didn't say. So, yeah, it's been very much a focus of, okay, what's the ethics? What's the evidence? What's the healing? What is the healing for the person receiving? But it's not entertainment. As fascinating as it is not entertainment.
You can see how it kind of, for a lot of people, seems to slip into entertainment, whether knowingly or unknowingly at the time. That's really interesting. How do you kind of navigate the balance between seeking spiritual enlightenment and staying grounded in the present moment? How do you live your life, and what rituals do you follow? What do you try and even follow at this kind of current day? I'm trying to work out how does Sarah live her life now?
So it's changed in the last year. So to put into context, even though my mediumship journey began 27 years ago, like many women my age, many will have gone through, the spirit world may have been introduced to them, but they then had families to raise or other careers. And most of us will have had other careers, but there hasn't been the time or the capacity or the financial security to go, oh, this is something I'm just going to do. So for years, I had other roles, raised a family, did other jobs, and then I would have circle once a week. So for years and years, I would run circles and then do my own workshops and bits and pieces. But really, I think as mediums, we can be put up there as being closer to that enlightenment spiritual place when we're actually just normal people. I think, I know with all the tutors you've spoken to talk about sitting in the power, sitting in the presence. It is still the foundation. I believe it's the foundation for everyone, whether they're mediumistic or not, to make that time to just connect with the divine, to connect, with that part of themselves, that spark of spirit. And then just to keep looking at ourselves and go, can we do better? To be able to just step forward and shine our light where we can. So, do I have rituals? I don't have rituals. I do have the power. So it is my moment of, Mavis Patilla would talk about being in the power when she was ironing. Quite often not to be too personal, but I can be in the shower and then just have, a thought, an awareness, a connection. I think it's about walking through the world as, well, first as spirit, secondly as a medium, that it is a part of who you are. And I think particularly if we go back a couple of decades, I can remember a time where I wouldn't have told everybody I was a medium. I didn't want the judgment. I can certainly remember being asked not to talk about it at dinner parties so our children wouldn't be bullied at school for having a witch in the family. So it becomes part of who you are. So I think, it's not so much that I have rituals, Jason. I think it's just an awareness, a connection, trusting intuition, going within.
Culturally, and I know I'm going to take out the probably the broadest brush in the world here to ask this question, but what, as a society as a whole, what is the view in Australia? Are people quite open to this, or I'm just trying to get a sense of what it's like.
Good question. So, as you've touched on, we don't have a spiritualist church in every town or almost on every corner. Certainly, I think the Australian people are still. It's kind of that funny thing, isn't it? Where people won't tell you anything, but then you say, "Oh yeah, I'm interested in this." "Oh my goodness, let me tell you, I had an experience one." Or tell me more. "Oh, what can you see?" It's like, I can't see anything. I'm just having a chat with you. So I think people are open to it. There's the normal group of skeptics, and there should be. There absolutely should be, because like anywhere, there are those who are ethical, trained, try and do the right thing, and there are those who are not and who are doing, malicious things. So, I want people to be skeptical. I want people to approach any medium with discernment. So I think, like many churches, trying to get numbers in is difficult. I think there's still an entertainment factor of, we get hundreds of people into psychic fairs. You think, why do you get 1,000 people turning up to a psychic fair, but you're lucky to get 30 people turning up for a donation church service where there's philosophy and music and inspiration and healing and a demonstration of mediumship? So it's not hidden. It's not something, I have no qualms with telling people what I do. I think, well, if they're uncomfortable, so go, well, hang on. I know something, I believe in something, I do something that is evidential, that gives me a connection to the spirit world. Prove your God to me. Prove your God to me. Because, we are basically a Christian community. We celebrate our Easter and we are, yes, we're multicultural, but we've still got the public holidays of Christmas and Easter. It's like, well, if you're happy to celebrate Christmas and you're happy to, acknowledge Easter, etc., and you believe in God, how are psychics or mediums any more difficult to comprehend?
I think it, as a society, I think we're becoming much more open-minded generally, but I think there still is a lot of that kind of stereotyping, looking at you like you should have a broom that you're going to go and jet off on at any moment. Absolutely. So I do totally get that. With your teaching and experiences as a tutor, so to speak, a lot of people who listen to this podcast are interested in medium. They might be trying to become a medium, trying to learn the skills themselves. From the benefit of all your years' experience of teaching people, what advice would you give to people generally trying to develop the mediumship? Having, I'm sure you've learned so many lessons along the way yourself, but what advice would you give to people trying to, even if it's just not necessarily their mediumship, but tap in it to, get those kind of moments of intuitive spark? What would you say to people?
So many things. That's the problem, Jason. So many things.
We're in no rush here. You go through as many as you like. We love advice here.
So the first thing I'd say, particularly with the mediumship aspect, I'd say, why? Why do you want to become a medium? What has drawn you? Is it a part of your calling? Is it something that you just cannot imagine not doing? That is something that no matter what else is happening in your life, that you will be pulled back to it. Because, I look at mediumship as a service. We were talking about, the military world and then the spirit world and the spiritualist world. And I think, all around the world are wonderful people serving others in thousands of different ways. And maybe how we're meant to serve isn't necessarily, through mediumship. It's not an easy path. And that's why I would say, why? Why do you want to do it? Is it something that makes you feel special? Is it something that makes you different? Is it something, there's a lot of talk about students who want to become professional mediums, many students who want to jump into teaching. As I said, I wouldn't encourage that. And it's not because I don't love teaching, because I absolutely do. But there is a cost to your own work as a medium when you're giving out to others.
Why is that? Why is that?
Well, I think it's really a pull on your power. Okay, so you think, that we sit for the power, we sit for our development. And then when your mind and your time and your efforts are based on bringing others up, that there is less focus on your own development, your own experience. You look at a lot of mediums who you admire and go, well, who do they go to? Where do they get that spiritual nourishment where they can just sit in a class or in a circle and have time where they just get to blend and to be and to sit in the presence, because they're always giving out to others. And as I said, you get bruised. You get bruised because you have to have some humility because we don't have all the answers as well. So I've already gone off on a tangent. You're going to have to take
honestly, you fall down so many rabbit holes on this podcast. I'm the one that's worse at it. So I understand why that's taxing. What else has being a teacher taught you, and what other advice would you give to students? I understand that it's not an easy path, and I'm starting to understand more myself why the path of a medium is not such an easy path. And I think it's because it puts a floodlight on areas of your life that if something's not going right in your life or you're not living your life in the right way, mediumship just puts a floodlight on it. And actually, it's even with myself, some of the things that maybe I didn't realize was such an issue, but then as soon as I try and connect with spirit, I understand what the issues are. Now I'm going off on a complete tangent, but what other advice would you give to people trying to do this? Because you're right, it's not an easy path. It's a very difficult path. Yeah. What else would you say?
Find the right tutors. Find the people that, and I've debated with colleagues about this as well. Find the people that can demonstrate what they teach. Find the people who live their lives in a certain way that you go, that they won't be perfect. Absolutely, they won't be perfect. But do they walk their talk? Recognize that it's not a race. We've got eternity to get this sorted, right? To grow and to understand and to expand. You guys, particularly in the UK, have a plethora of opportunities, from spiritualist churches to getting to the AFC to tutors. And now the world is a little bit closer because of our online options. I would say to students, don't get yourself in a pretzel by going to 25 different teachers who teach everything in a different way.
Yeah.
Find the ones, go and see people work. Go, right, what are they like? It's kind of like find the tribe, find the umbrella. I look with a bit of a giggle sometimes at how many people talk about they were mentored by or they were trained by. And when you dig a little deeper, it's not mentored. They weren't mentored by anybody. were they trained by? Or they attended a week's course at AFC, or they did 3 workshops. And then they take on the ownership of, I was with Paul Jacobs for 2 weekends, so therefore I was trained by Paul Jacobs. You think, come on, team, let's bring some honesty. I was mentored by, mentored to me means being taken under the wing,
it's one-on-one. It's close, isn't it? It's not.
It's close. It's the person that you can ring up and go, this happened, that happened. What do you make of this? And they can go, well, I'm not going to tell you off you go. Or they'll say, come here, grasshopper. Have that, I look around and go, boy, I would have loved to have someone who would have taken me on platform, Jason. I would have loved to have someone who was there to, cheer me on. Where I'd been very, very lucky is, as time progressed and one events came about and we started bringing tutors out, the last, from 2016, so going on eight years now, I've been able to spend a lot of time with wonderful tutors, and that time, it's worth more money than I could ever pay, right?
Yeah,
because it's like when you're living, breathing it, and you're having those personal conversations, and you're watching them teach all week, and then when you're teaching with them, and then when you're on platform with them, and I look back and go, oh, I know how much angst I could have been saved over all these years if I had just known this little bit or that little bit. Many know I give Paul Jacobs great credit for where my mediumship is now, because, hosted Paul numerous times to Australia. And when he first came, Jason, I was getting quite annoyed because, he would teach in a certain way, and I go, well, that's not my understanding. Hang on. And, for the first year or two, I'm like, this is making me a bit cross, because I had to go back and reassess what I believed to be true. And I just, he knows how much I admire him. But my mediumship shifted incredibly, incredibly. And he's been so supportive of me. And in fact, both he and Mavis said to me very early on, Sarah, when are you going to put yourself out there? You can't always be the host, and you can't always be the one that's getting every other medium on their way, And so I would say, I would never say Paul has mentored me, but I would say, I think he'd let me say he's looked after me pretty well. So
has that changed in yourself now? Would you say that you are where you need to be in terms of being out there enough now?
Well, I only left a normal day job a year ago to do this.
That's a massive move, isn't it, in itself?
Huge. And, I left a very secure position with a good income and holiday pay and sick pay and superannuation to go, right, I'm out there on my Pat Malone. Is that an Australian expression? It means alone.
It is an Australian expression, but I absolutely love it. So please feel free to throw more of them in.
Well, I don't know what Pat Malone is, alone. So, I do giggle because, when some people are like, oh, Sarah's out there, it's like, this is not an overnight sensation. This is 27 years. Maybe I'm just slow. In my learning, Jason.
No, do you know what? I think I think you're very modest. I think it sounds to me like it's more of a confidence issue in putting yourself out there. So 1 year on from doing it, how are you finding it? How is it going?
So, look, I've been teaching for decades.
Yeah.
But working professionally sort of full time, I'm loving it. Again, thank heavens for the internet, because I get to teach my online classes. And there's just something so joyful when you come online and there's a lady in Spain and there's a lady in Holland and here's here's the gentleman from wherever. And you just think, isn't this incredible that you can talk to people across the world? And then when there's people who are brand new, and you think, oh, wouldn't it be nice just to jump back to those very early experiences where, the trumpets were blaring and the drums were going and you felt everything in such a way, and that excitement factor. Look, there's still excitement. There's absolutely still excitement. But just to see, I think it's a bit like that first reading where you go, my life changed, my belief systems changed, my understanding and even my path changed on that day. And if I have a little bit of an influence in not necessarily making people mediums or teachers, but if I take the fear of death away, if I bring healing to a relationship that someone's grieving, if I can bring some closure to some sort of even a psychic need, but just to watch people grow in that way. So
do you know what? It's funny you say that, because when you say almost, well, even if it's just changing someone's view on death, that in itself, Sarah, is such a massive thing. And I think that sometimes, even I can sort of, lose a slight bit of touch with where I was at the very beginning of this journey, and how massive that shift and change of belief system was to me. So I just want to kind of lastly ask you then, because there'll be people listening to this that might be thinking, well, actually, I've been studying it for a long time. I maybe want to make that transition over to putting this as my full focus. What would you say to people with the benefit of hindsight, people that might be considering going down this pathway of doing it, as their full-time profession?
Professionally?
Yeah.
Well, I would say look very closely at your intention. Look very closely at your ability. Consider your finances, because for many, when you're in this world, we all think, it's everything, right? If I'm not teaching, I'm running a spiritualist church. If I'm not doing that, I'm running events, etc. So it's my whole life. But for paying clients, for most, it's a luxury. So it's either, yes, you can have people who are in deep grief, who are just looking for that connection to their loved ones, and they will pay whatever they need to pay to get that. Okay. But for most people, they don't need to see a medium. They don't. So there's a lot of mediums out there. Why do you want to do it? Can you afford to live on a modest income? If you think you're going to hit the jackpot and travel the world and make big money, name me 10 people who are actively doing well financially and living that life. And then think, well, how many people, are trying,
well,
to make
it's true. I would struggle to give you 10 myself.
Right?
I could probably, if I had a notepad, don't get me wrong, I could probably eventually get there, but it's not easy, is it? Because even I can't think of 10. Right.
It's not really, if you're, some of the best mediums are the ones that aren't known, Jason. Some of the best mediums are the ones who are just quietly doing their private readings. They do a great job, and there's this word of mouth, and that they have full bookings. May not even have a presence anyway. I hate doing Facebook and this, that, and the other, and I'm not good at it, and I think, oh, Sarah, people have got to be able to find you, because that's the reality of the world that we live in. But if you're, providing for others, or if money is tight, this is not a business that I would suggest you go into. I would say, why don't you continue doing things that bring you joy, and or do the job that you have to do, and then try it as a side thing.
Yes.
See how you go. Build slowly, because there will become a point. It's kind of that tipping point, right? That you go, you know what? I have enough clients. I'm getting enough work, etc. Okay, I can survive on this. I know lots of students and some teachers for Australia who, they were fortunate enough that their financial circumstances meant they could come and go to the UK. They could get their qualifications. They could do all of these things. But most people aren't in that situation.
No, it's that is a luxury beyond luxury.
That's right. But it's not everyone's cup of tea, even though we're in it and we go, oh, but it's the best and it's wonderful. And as you say, if I just think of the, I don't know if you're aware, but we've just had a terrible incident in Sydney where
yes, I saw that.
And I was saying to my daughter last night, as someone who believes in the spirit world, as someone who believes, in the connection and the one of everyone, when you're feeling helpless, when you're feeling like, what can we do in those situations where you can't physically do something for anyone, to be able to, what? I can put my thoughts out to those families. I can put my healing thoughts out to those who transition to spirit. Does it change the world? No. But it's like knowing if someone can meet their transition without fear, that's a life worth living, right? To go if you can.
I agree. I think definitely so. I think that's so important as well, because I didn't even used to want to talk about it. And, that was the catalyst for my own journey. Sarah, I have loved every moment of this conversation. I think it's been so...
I've gone all over the place, Jason.
Oh, we always do on this. I think it's that is the very nature of talking about some of these very important subjects. Is there a closing thought or a pearl of wisdom, Sarah, that you would like to leave us on today? This is always the question I ask that puts people on the spot, but do you have a lasting thought for us?
Again, which one to pick? What to share?
Follow your intuition, Sarah.
I will. I think just know that whatever you do it with your whole heart. Serve whatever way you can. Serve humanity. Bring that divine spark of you to life. Be the light. And you know what? If you're a brilliant accountant, be a brilliant accountant. If you are a wonderful teacher, do that. The world needs everyone to shine in whatever way they can be. Yes, I love mediumship. I would never stop anyone from going down this path because it means such a great deal to me, but know why you're doing it.
I think that's beautiful and really good advice. Sarah, thanks so much for coming onto the SoulSync podcast. If you want to learn more about Sarah, website address is in the show notes, so just go down there and you'll be able to find them. But Sarah, thank you.
Jason, you're a star. Thank you for sharing your understanding with so many people. It's wonderful.
Thank you so much.